Let's start with the outbreaks that shattered empires, and slowly work our way towards the stuff of nightmares, the plagues that almost wiped us out. For most of history, humans thought the biggest threats were easy to see. Armies on the horizon, kings with too much power, revolutions in the streets. But some of the deadliest enemies we've ever faced fit on the head of a pin, rode into cities on the backs of rats, or hid inside a single careless cough. In this video, we're going to count down 8 of the deadliest plagues in human history. Some of them helped bring mighty empires to their knees. Others rewired how our cities work, how we think about disease, and even who survived long enough to have kids and change our DNA. And by the time we reach number 1, you might never look at a simple sneeze the same way again. Number 8. The Plague of Athens. If you lived in Athens in 430 BC, you would have thought your city was untouchable. You had marble temples, brilliant philosophers, and the most famous democracy on earth. You had walls so strong they could keep out Sparta, your deadliest rival. What you didn't have was any defense against whatever rode in through your gates that summer. The Plague of Athens struck in the second year of the Peloponnesian War, right when victory still felt like it was within reach. As Spartan armies approached, the Athenians did what they thought was smart. They pulled everyone from the countryside inside the city walls. Those strong stone walls turned Athens into a giant, overcrowded petri dish. People started to feel a strange burning from within. High fever, violent thirst, vomiting, skin rashes, sores, even bleeding from the eyes. Some lost their memory. Many died so fast that families didn't even have time to bury their dead properly. Houses were left full of bodies, streets lined with unattended corpses. Imagine walking through a city that used to be full of debate and theater, and now the loudest sound is the buzz of flies around hastily dug mass graves. Doctors rushed in to help and died first. No one knew what to do. No one knew what this even was. They didn't understand bacteria or viruses. They understood the gods are mad at us and my neighbor just dropped dead. And this verd, their reavers of W1, to unrespirated in all the fliverd. One man survived and watched it all. The historian Thucydides. He got sick, lived through it, and then wrote a chilling, detailed description of the plague, the symptoms, and how it destroyed the city's morals along with its population. It's thanks to him that we even know this outbreak happened. Modern scholars have spent decades arguing over what disease this actually was. Typhoid, smallpox, measles, something we've never seen since. To this day, no one can say for sure, which is comforting. In just a few years, the Plague of Athens may have killed a quarter or more of the city's population, including Pericles, its most famous leader. The plague didn't just take lives, it shattered confidence. It helped turn a proud democracy into a weakened state, stumbling toward defeat. It wasn't Spartan spears that truly doomed Athens. It was something no one could see, carried in on the summer air. Number 7. The Antonine Plague. Rome loved to conquer. It marched legions across continents, built roads everywhere, and brought back treasures from half the known world. Unfortunately, half the known world also includes its diseases. In 165 CE, Roman soldiers returned from a campaign in the east. They brought gold, exotic goods, and something that would be remembered as the Antonine Plague. It started quietly. A few soldiers with fevers, a strange rash. Then it spread along the famous Roman roads, from legion camps to bustling cities. Within weeks, people were collapsing in marketplaces, coughing up blood, covered in pustules. Imagine a Roman town in its prime, bustling bathhouses, crowded forums, gladiator games in the amphitheater. Now empty the baths, shut the markets, and replace the cheers in the arena with the constant tolling of funeral bells. The physician Galen described the symptoms: high fever, diarrhea, inflammation of the throat, and a rash that covered the whole body. Many modern scholars think this was likely an early pandemic of smallpox, one of the deadliest diseases humans have ever faced. The plague didn't discriminate. Soldiers, farmers, slaves, wealthy citizens, everyone was at risk. In the capital, it was reported that at one point 2,000 people a day were dying in Rome alone. Across the empire, estimates suggest the Antonine Plague may have killed 5–10 million people, as much as a fifth or more of the entire Roman population. Even the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic philosopher king, eventually fell victim to the disease that ravaged his armies and cities. Historians still argue about how much this outbreak contributed to Rome's long decline. But one thing is clear: after the Antonine Plague, the empire was never quite the same again. The great machine of Rome had coughed, sputtered, and found out it could bleed. Rome conquered half the world. One tiny virus marched through Rome like it owned the place. Number 6. The Plague of Justinian. Now we're moving from "this is really bad" into "this could have ended the Eastern Roman Empire for good." In there of Hend Tausend Rav, but we have Brastard Tang. Fast forward to 541 CE. The western half of the Roman Empire has already fallen, but in the east, in Constantinople, Emperor Justinian is dreaming big. He wants to restore Roman glory, reconquer lost lands, build monuments that will last forever. Then the rats show up. Ships bring grain from Egypt and other provinces into Constantinople. In the grain, fleas. On the fleas, a very familiar bacterium, Yersinia pestis, the same plague organism that will later cause the medieval Black Death. At first, it's just a few unexplained deaths along the docks. Sailors with sudden fevers and swellings in the armpit or groin. Then the disease surges inward, into the heart of the city. Picture Constantinople at its peak: massive walls, shining churches, packed marketplaces. Now I imagine carts piled high with bodies rumbling past the Hagia Sophia. Imagine graveyards overflowing, so full that workers start throwing corpses into old fortifications and even into the sea. Contemporary reports say that at the height of the outbreak, thousands of people were dying in the city each day. Imperial officials ran out of coffins, out of cliffs, out of places to dig pits. Justinian himself caught the plague and barely survived. Across the Mediterranean, in cities from Egypt to Italy, the Justinianic plague likely killed tens of millions of people over multiple waves. Some estimates put the global death toll anywhere between 25 and 50 million. At a time when the entire world population was far smaller than today. The empire didn't collapse immediately, but its strength was shattered. Plans to reconquer the West stalled. Frontiers became harder to defend. Trade shrank. And all of it because a microbe had decided that rats, fleas, and humans made a pretty good trio. Justinian dreamed of rebuilding Rome. Instead, his empire became a warning about what happens when disease outruns ambition. Number 5. Smallpox in the New World. Sometimes, the deadliest invader doesn't carry a sword, it carries a scab. When Europeans crossed the Atlantic at the end of the 15th century, they brought steel, gunpowder, horses, and a set of diseases that their bodies had spent centuries learning to fight. The people already living in the Americas had never seen those diseases before. Smallpox was one of the worst. In Europe, Asia, and Africa, it was already a feared killer, disfiguring, blinding, and often deadly. But at least there, people had some inherited eye immunity. In the Americas, it was like dropping fire into dry grass. Over the next few centuries, smallpox and other old world diseases helped wipe out huge portions of indigenous populations, sometimes 70–90% in certain regions. Imagine a thriving city of the Aztec Empire, markets bursting with color, temples crowded with worshippers, canals full of canoes. Now, imagine that same city months after smallpox arrives. The markets are silent. The canals are choked with abandoned boats. Houses full of people too weak to move, covered head to toe in painful pustules. Whole villages became ghost towns in a matter of weeks. Bodies were left where they fell because there simply weren't enough survivors to bury them all. Spanish conquests in places like Mexico and Peru suddenly became miraculously easy, not just because of superior weapons, but because the enemy was already dying en masse before battles even began. History remembers conquistadors and their steel. It often forgets the scabs and fevers that did most of the killing. Number 4. The Age of Cholera. For this one, we're moving into the age of industry, steam, and raw sewage. In the 19th century, the world started to urbanize fast. Cities got bigger than they'd ever been. People crowded into slums with no plumbing, no proper waste disposal, and drinking water taken from the same rivers everyone used as a toilet. Into that stew of filth walked Vibrio cholerae, the bacterium that causes cholera, one of the most brutal diarrheal diseases on Earth. Waves of cholera pandemics surged out of the Ganges Delta in India and crashed into cities across Europe, the Americas, and beyond, killing millions over multiple outbreaks. Cholera is not subtle. A person can go from healthy to dead in less than a day. Profuse diarrhea, vomiting, severe dehydration, bodies shrivel, skin takes on a bluish, ghostly tone. People called it the Blue Death. They reading the basements denouements of the rattled day. Imagine a working-class neighborhood in 19th century London. Narrow alleys, overflowing cesspits, children playing in puddles of who knows what. A new day starts. And by evening, half the houses on a single street have someone lying on the floor, too weak to stand, surrounded by dirty water buckets. At first, many officials thought diseases like cholera were caused by miasma, bad air, evil smells. The fact that whole streets sharing the same pump got sick was a coincidence, apparently. Then came doctors like John Snow, who carefully mapped cases and traced one London outbreak back to a single contaminated water pump on Broad Street. That investigation helped prove something crucial. It wasn't just the air. It was the water. Cholera didn't just kill. It forced cities to completely rethink how they handled sewage and drinking water, leading to modern sewer systems, water treatment, and the idea that maybe, just maybe, your toilet and your kitchen tap shouldn't be best friends. Cholera forced cities to choose, either clean up their water or keep burying their workers. Number 3. The Third Plague Pandemic. You'd think, after a few rounds of plague, humanity and Yersinia pestis would be done with each other. Spoiler, we were not. In the mid-19th century, in the Chinese province of Yunnan, political turmoil, mining booms, and population growth created perfect conditions for plague among rodents. From there, the so-called Third Plague Pandemic began another global wave of bubonic plague that would eventually kill over 12 million people, mostly in India and China. This dime, the world was more connected. We had steamships. Picture a busy colonial port at the end of the 1800s. Warehouses stacked with crates, sailors hauling sacks, officials in white suits inspecting cargo. Beneath the floorboards and in the holds of ships, rats scurry, fleas bite, and the plague bacterium quietly spreads. Outbreaks erupted in port cities like Hong Kong and Bombay. Colonial authorities responded by quarantining neighborhoods, burning down infected houses, and sometimes targeting local communities in heavy-handed, racist ways. In India alone, the third plague pandemic killed at least 10 million people. Globally, the toll may have been over 15 million. But this pandemic also changed something. For the first deme, scientists were able to identify Yersinia pestis as the cause of plague, understand the role of rats and fleas, and develop early public health strategies based on that knowledge. It was a horror story, but also a crash course in what not to do in public health, and a preview of what a truly globalized pandemic looks like. The third plague pandemic proved that as soon as the world connects by ship and rail, rats and germs get first-class tickets too. Number 2. The 1918 influenza, the Spanish flu. World War I killed roughly 16 million people. The flu that followed looked at those numbers and said, "Hold my soup. They're 7 Ziston base." In 1918, as the war was grinding toward its bloody end, a new strain of influenza virus began tearing through military camps. Soldiers living in cramped trenches, trains, and barracks were perfect vectors. They carried the virus across oceans and borders with every deployment and every demobilization. Unlike typical seasonal flu, which often hits the very young and the very old hardest, this pandemic had a terrifying twist. It killed huge numbers of healthy young adults in their 22nd and 30s. Imagine a city in 1918. Streetcars packed with workers, kids playing outside, families gathering for parades. Within days, those same streets are empty. Hospitals overflow. Schools and theaters shut down. The few people still outside walk quickly, some wearing crude gauze masks. People would feel fine in the morning, develop a fever by midday, and be dead by night. Some turned a dark, purplish blue as their lungs filled with fluid. Newspapers struggled to keep up with the obituaries. Globally, the 1918 flu infected an estimated 1/3 of the world's population. It killed at least 50 million people, and possibly up to 100 million, far more than the First World War itself. We had no antibiotics to treat secondary bacterial pneumonia, no antivirals, no modern intensive care, just overcrowded hospitals, basic nursing, homemade masks, and desperate public health measures. For a brief moment, it felt like the whole world was holding its breath, and the virus got to decide who exhaled. Number 1. The Black Death. If any plague ever came close to ending medieval European civilization as people knew it, this was the one. The Black Death began in the mid-14th century, likely somewhere in Central Asia, and traveled along trade routes toward Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Carried by fleas on rats, carried by merchants on caravans, carried by sailors on ships, death rolled in step by step, mile by mile. In 1347, ships arrived in Mediterranean ports with a terrifying cargo, half the crew dead or dying. The rest covered in black, swollen buboes in their armpits and groin. Authorities, in their infinite wisdom, sometimes just let the cargo unload anyway. Within months, cities that had been thriving for centuries were transformed. Picture a typical medieval town, narrow, cobbled streets, markets full of noise, church bells ringing, kids running through the crowd. Now replace that soundscape with something else. Carts creaking under the weight of bodies. Priests whispering last rites as fast as they can. The distant chant of "Bring out your dead." Now on this, one bows. Some people developed bubonic plague, those infamous black swellings. Others developed pneumonic plague, which spread directly from person to person through the air. killing even faster. Whole families died within days of each other. We don't know the exact death toll, but the Black Death is believed to have killed somewhere between 30 and 60% of the population in many parts of Europe, and tens of millions across Europe, Western Asia, and North Africa. People didn't understand germs, so they did what humans often do when scared. They blamed each other. They blamed sin, bad air, stars, foreigners, religious minorities. In some places, panicked mobs turned on vulnerable communities, adding massacres to the list of horrors. And yet, in the long run, the Black Death didn't just kill people, it killed the old world. With so many workers dead, labor became precious. Survivors could demand better wages and conditions. Feudal obligations began to crumble. Land changed hands. Some historians argue that the Black Death helped crack open the rigid medieval order and set the stage for massive social and economic change. It was the worst thing that had ever happened to millions of individual people, and the beginning of the end for a system that had locked them in place for centuries. The Black Death didn't just smell like death, it smelled like the smoke of an old order burning down. Plagues like these are easy to think of as distant horror stories, dusty facts in history books, but every one of them was once someone's present tense. For the Athenians, it wasn't the Plague of Athens. It was, my husband is sick and I don't know why. For villagers in India, it wasn't the third plague pandemic. It was something in this city is killing everyone I love. For the people of 1918, it wasn't the Spanish flu. It was, we just survived the war, and now this. This one. If there's a pattern here, it's this. We are almost always one step behind our diseases. We pack ourselves into cities before we understand sanitation. We send ships around the world before we understand quarantine. We go to war and line men up in trenches before we fully grasp how a virus jumps from one crowded lung to another. Each plague leaves graveyards and grief behind, but it also leaves something else: new science, new laws, new habits, new systems, sewer networks, vaccination, quarantine rules. The whole idea of public health, that doesn't make the losses worth it. Nothing ever could. But it does mean that our world today, our cities, our immune systems, even our DNA has been shaped by these invisible enemies as much as by kings, generals, or revolutions. So, after everything we've just walked through, which outbreak on this list terrifies you the most? And after seeing how tiny things have toppled mighty empires over and over again, are you really sure we've already faced the worst one?